Hey everyone, welcome to Pedro's Movie Cavern. I am your host, Pedro. I say I am your host, it's not really a host. I'm not hosting anything, I'm just doing a video. But this is part 3 of my ongoing series, Brief History of Post-Apocalypse Movies. This is part 3. This is the 1980s. My favourite decade for movies, a lot of people's favourite decade for movies. Some of the best films came out of my generation in that decade. The Thing, Empire Strikes Back, Back to the Future, Rocky IV, and these post-apocalypse films that you're going to hear me talk about today. I've taken on all the constructive criticism that was commented in the last few videos, and I have spent the last near 2 weeks sourcing clips, editing them together, scripting, doing voiceovers, and it's been a slog. It's taken so long. It doesn't help that my laptop isn't really that powerful. All the videos that I've posted previously, I edited together on a program called CapCut, and this time round I have been editing on a DaVinci Resolve. And while the program is fantastic and it's free, my laptop does seem to struggle with it, and I've been having some playback issues. But if you look past all that, it's actually not been too bad. It's not been too bad. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump into the 1980s. We begin the decade with an underseen masterpiece. Well, a masterpiece in its original form, not the bastardized version released in the West. Kinji Fukasaku's Virus, aka Day of Reckoning, a near 3-hour Japanese-American co-production directed by Kinji Fukasaku and co-written by Fukasaku, Koji Takada, and Gregory Knapp. It follows a US military-engineered virus that gets out after a plane crash and wipes out almost all of Earth's population. The only survivors are a group of scientists based in Antarctica who must race against time to find a cure to save what remains of mankind. Virus features a huge international cast that includes Isao Natsuyagi, Kensaku Morita, and Sonny Chiba from the Japanese cast. And from the US cast, we have the likes of Robert Vaughn, Glenn Ford, Henry Silver, Edward James Olmos, George Kennedy, Bo Svensson, Chuck Connors, and Olivia Hussey, just to name a few. The Western release was butchered from 155 minutes down to 108 minutes to focus on the US cast, almost completely cutting the Japanese parts out. This is how I originally saw the film, on a $5.99 budget DVD, having no prior knowledge of it having 47 minutes removed from the original film. Virus bears some similarities to the 1975 BBC series Survivors, which followed the same sort of narrative of a global pandemic wiping out 99% of the world's population. Virus was, however, adapted from the novel by Japanese author Sakeo Komatsu's 1964 novel Fukatsu no Hai, which was also translated into English in 2012. Virus appears to be a clear influence on the novel The Last Ship, which again was turned into a television series starring Eric Dane and Adam Baldwin, which ran for 5 seasons between 2014 and 2018. Virus is available on DVD in its 108-minute version, and you can find the original version, the 155-minute version, in a high-definition transfer on YouTube, which I highly recommend checking out. If you don't want to watch the 155-minute version because it might be too long, then by all means check out the 108-minute version. 1981 gave us the second entry in George Miller's now iconic Mad Max franchise, Mad Max 2, or The Road Warrior, depending on what region you're in. Mad Max 2 is a chaotic mix of violence, car stunts, and general motor vehicle carnage, and stands as one of the greatest pure action movies of all time. To catch you up, Max is a former cop who went on a mission of revenge against the motorcycle gang, mowed down his wife and child during the events of the first film. Mad Max was set at the dawn of the collapse of civilization, a time where, as they say in the movie, the roads had become a white line nightmare. The Road Warrior picks up 5 years later, according to the official timeline, after the oil wars ended with a nuclear exchange. Oil, or as it became known, gasoline, has become the most valuable commodity in the now wastelands of Australia. Max, with his trusty sidekick, an Australian blue heeler or cattle dog named, believe it or not, Dog, and his souped-up V8 Ford Falcon, the car from the first film, he wanders the wasteland in search of gas and food, a wanderer, a nomad, and an all-round badass. The film opens with Max in the throes of a chase. Metal on tarmac, burnt rubber, and Bennett from Commando in buttless chaps and a mohawk on a motorcycle chasing behind him. Max comes across an oil refinery in the middle of the arid outback that's getting hounded by a gang of wasteland punks on motorbikes and modified cars, led by the hockey mask wearing Jason Voorhees, if he was played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, Lord Humongous. In a plot that follows the well-known narrative set out in the classic George Stevens and Alan Ladd western Shane, Max becomes the lone gunman protecting a small community against the bandits. Mad Max 2 or The Road Warrior is an incredible movie and a film I've sung the praises of relentlessly in the past. It's a film that even now, 43 years later, still stands as one of, if not the best action movie ever made. Mad Max 2 is available on DVD, Blu-ray and 4K UHD. I highly recommend getting the 4K anthology box set when it comes up in sales because it has the best quality sound and video, and the picture quality is far and above the best you'll see the film. 1981 also saw the release of a French science fiction movie titled Malevil, directed by Christian Deschalonges. The film follows a small group of people in the French town of Malevil attend a meeting in the wine cellar of a large chateau. While their nuclear war breaks out and the heat and the noise causes everyone to pass out. When they awaken, they find that the outside world is a scorched hellscape where almost nothing remains, and find they must embark on a new life in an isolated world of violence. Malevil is a very hard film to get hold of. I couldn't even find a proper trailer. However, if you search hard enough online, you might be able to find a download torrent for it. It's a fairly decent movie if a tad on the bleak side. 1982 also saw the rise in the Mad Max clones, as you would expect, the majority of which came from Italy. Much like they did with Alien a few years prior, PA movies were cheap to make, so Italian filmmakers churned them out in piles. A lot of them were trash, some better than others, but mostly just cheap cash-ins on the success of Mad Max 2. The standouts during this period were 2020 Texas Gladiators, a film so cheap and badly made that it made The Room look like Citizen Kane. Directed by Joe D'Amato, the Italian schlockmeister who peddled his wares in a variety of genres, including hardcore porn. 2020 Texas Gladiators was co-written by George Eastman, a well-known Italian exploitation star who admitted in an interview in 1996 that the films were made cheaply and very quickly, and the only reason he wrote them was for financial reasons and put no attempt at originality into any of them. Same can't be said for Enzo G. Castellari's Warriors of the Wasteland, aka The New Barbarians, the third film in the Bronx Warriors series. Although this one doesn't seem to follow the same plot or style of the previous two movies, as this one is straight post-apocalyptic. Warrior of the Wasteland, or Warriors of the Wasteland, reunites Castellari with his Bronx Warriors star Fred Williamson, who by this point probably made these films for a box of cigars and a bottle of whiskey. Warriors of the Wasteland does have something over 2020 Texas Gladiators, though. This one is actually competently directed, and the recent remaster looks great and shows off some of the widescreen footage beautifully. The Italian rip-offs kept coming, though, and in 1983 we got the worst of the worst, a film that not only rips off Mad Max, but also John Carpenter's Escape from New York, and Star Wars. Sergio Martino's god-awful 2019 After the Fall of New York. A movie so terrible with cardboard sets, bad hair, and some truly laughable miniature effects that even Roger Corman would laugh at. These films do have some enjoyment though. Yes, they're cheap. Yes, they're badly acted, but I think now, watching them in 2024, there's something quite endearing about seeing a bunch of people try to make a movie like Mad Max 2 on the budget of Mad Max 1, without the skill and the passion of George Miller. 1983 also gave us Testament, which would form part of the Cold War nuke trilogy. Directed by Lynn Littman and starring Jane Alexander, William Devane, and Lucas Haas in a very early role for Kevin Costner. Testament follows the life of a family in a small town in the aftermath of a nuclear attack on the US, and how the gradual fallout from the attack affects them and the people around them. Testament is a powerful film, dramatic and heartbreaking in equal measures. Jane Alexander's powerful performance anchors the film and shows the grief and pain a mother has to go through when there's nothing she can do to prevent the inevitable. Testament was never intended to be a theatrical release as it was originally made for television, but the execs at Paramount were so impressed that they decided to release it theatrically, much to the dismay of the cast who sued the studio for a higher pay as they'd signed on for TV salaries. The case was settled out of court. Jane Alexander's performance was so good, she earned an Oscar nomination for Best Lead Actress, but unfortunately lost to Shirley MacLaine for Terms of Endearment. Testament is an incredible film. The performances are outstanding, and it deserves to be seen by more people. I have the Region 1 Paramount DVD, but the film was recently released Blu-ray by Australian boutique brand Imprint. It's also available to rent or buy on YouTube and Amazon Prime. Following on from Testament, The Day After presents a vision of the same scenario but from the perspectives of multiple different characters. Written by Edward Hume and directed by Nicholas Meyer, the man responsible for some of the best Star Trek movies, and starring a huge cast of Hollywood greats from Jason Robards, John Lithgow, and Steve Guttenberg to JoBeth Williams, Amy Madigan, and William Allen Young. The Day After was not a theatrical movie, it was a major television event that aired on November the 20th, 1983, and to this day remains the most watched TV movie ever broadcast on US television. The film follows the events of a global nuclear war between Russia and the US, which caused controversy at the time when it aired because it was never explicitly explained who actually fired first. We follow the residents of a small town in Kansas and how they deal with the impending attack and its inevitable aftermath and fallout. The same plot would carry over to the CBS series Jericho, which aired between 2005 and 2007 and lasted 2 series spanning 30 episodes, which also follows the residents of a small Kansas town who deal with the aftermath of a massive nuclear strike across the US. But, this being a TV network series, we also get a government conspiracy thrown in for good measure. The Day After is available on Blu-ray, DVD, and on streaming services like Prime Video. It's also available on YouTube. Italy wasn't the only country outside of the US making rip-off Mad Max movies. The Philippines had a crack too under the directorial eye of Cirio H. Santiago, a producer-director who worked with a lot of B-movie actors and producers in a career that spanned nearly 6 decades. In 1983, Santiago brought us Striker, a Mad Max rip-off that's actually quite well made. Striker stars Steve Sandor as Striker, a road warrior in a world where all of the Earth's water has dried up after some sort of global catastrophe. He meets a woman who knows the whereabouts of the last spring, guarded by a group of Amazons. When the woman is captured by a group of wasteland marauders, Striker teams up with some of the last remaining good guys and Amazons to battle the bad guys and save the woman. Striker, unlike the vast majority of Italian Mad Max rip-offs, actually succeeds in being a fairly decent action movie. Santiago's direction, while not on the level of, say, George Miller, is pretty good. The action sequences are well shot and choreographed, and the stunt work, production design, and costumes are pretty decent considering the low budget. Cirio H. Santiago would continue making films in the post-apocalypse genre, with the likes of 1985's Wheels of Fire, Equalizer 2000 starring Richard Norton from 1987, Future Hunters with a pre-Terminator 2 Robert Patrick from 1988, June Warriors from 91, and Raiders of the Sun the following year. Santiago's last film, Water Wars, was completed by exploitation king Jim Wynorski after the Filipino auteur passed away mid-production. 1983 also saw the directorial debut of French director Luc Besson. The Dernier Combat is a black and white post-apocalyptic nightmare starkly shot in monochrome and starring Jean Reno and Pierre Jolivet. The film takes place in a post-apocalyptic future where no one can speak, and the last remaining humans battle for the resources to survive. The Dernier Combat, or The Last Battle, is an interesting film. It's shot in black and white, and the characters have names like the Man, the Brute, the Captain, and the Doctor, which gives the film a deeper sense of mystery. At times both violent and heartfelt, Le Dernier Combat is a strange masterpiece of post-apocalyptic cinema, a futuristic 1980s silent movie reminiscent of Chris Marker's 1962 short La Jetée. 1984 saw the UK addition to the End of the World film considered to be one of the most harrowing and accurate portrayals of what a nuclear strike on the UK could look like and the aftermath that would follow. Threads was deemed too harrowing for audiences in 1984. Threads was in some way the UK's answer to the US TV movie The Day After and Testament, two movies that show the panic, attack, and fallout of a nuclear strike on US soil. The Day After was a much larger production, focusing on an array of characters, some soldiers, some farmers, and medical practitioners. Testament is a much smaller, confined film, keeping the film to just one location, a small town, and tugging on the heartstrings of audiences, focusing on a single family and how they deal with the fallout. Both films are fantastic, but compared to Threads, neither hold a candle. Threads was written by Barry Hines, who previously wrote the kitchen sink drama Kes, and it was directed by Mick Jackson, who would go on to direct Hollywood blockbusters The Bodyguard and Volcano. Threads was made on a TV budget and opted for a documentary style to tell its story. A story of working class people in a working class town before, during, and after a nuclear attack on the UK. The film focuses on one particular family, more specifically the eldest daughter and her boyfriend, in the town of Sheffield. Set during the Cold War in Thatcher's Britain at the height of the possibility of global nuclear war, Threads also looks at the politicians and bureaucrats who are in charge of maintaining some sort of law and order and planning, most of which is left to people not trained in crisis management. The first half of Threads is set up in a style where the viewer is a sort of fly on the wall in the lives of these working class families, but keeps us up to date on the war via quick cuts to the aforementioned government workers and scrolling text across the screen, like a bulletin. It's all very Mike Leigh, the kind of film you'd see made by Film 4, that very British institute of the mundane existence of council houses, minimum wage, and working class. When the bombs finally drop, the class system goes out the window, as everyone has to fend for themselves. The immediate aftermath of the nuclear strike paints a grim and realistic vision of what could and would be the following years of a nuclear fallout. Threads is grim viewing, and along with Pete Watkins' 1968 docudrama The War Game and Raymond Briggs' haunting animated movie When the Wind Blows from 1986, they make up a sort of grim British trilogy of post-nuclear films and that focus more on a realistic outcome to nuclear war than, say, Nicholas Meyer's more big Hollywood event movie, The Day After. Threads is available on Blu-ray as well as DVD. It was recently rebroadcast on the BBC to horrifically scar a new generation unaware of the horrors of nuclear war, and it's definitely worth watching. Director Tom Eberhardt gave us the ultimate Valleyle apocalypse with the awesome and frankly massively underrated Night of the Comet in 1984. A darkly comic, almost satirical take on the end of the world that follows two sisters who manage to survive an apocalyptic comet pass that turns 99% of people into dust. The two sisters, Regina and Samantha, played by Catherine Mary Stewart and Kelly Maroney, find themselves in an empty Los Angeles. What's the first thing they do? Go to a radio station and put out a message for any survivors. Then how about a trip to the mall to pick up some machine guns because some of the survivors of the comet have turned into zombies, and we all know the only way to kill a zombie is by removing the head or destroying the brain. Upon returning to the radio station, they meet Hector, a truck driver who managed to survive by sleeping in the back of his truck. Hector is played by Robert Beltran, a familiar face to Star Trek fans as he played Janeway's second-in-command Chakotay in Star Trek Voyager. Other familiar faces include Jeffrey Lewis, Sharon Farrell, and Mary Warrenov, just to name a few. Night the Comet is great. A true gem of 80s cheese, but also just a fun time too. It's available on DVD, Blu-ray, 4K, and on Amazon Prime and YouTube if you want to rent or buy it digitally. It's a film I highly recommend checking out if you're a lover of all things 80s science fiction. This brings us to 1985 and the third entry in the saga of Max Rokitansky. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome takes place 15 years after the fall of civilization, the events that were depicted in the 1978 original, and 10 years after the Road Warrior defeated the villainous Lord Humongous. Gasoline is no more, the oil is dried up, and Max, now just another wasteland wanderer, finds himself in Bartertown. Bartertown is run by Auntie Entity, played brilliantly by soul and pop icon Tina Turner. Max agrees to work for Auntie in return for his belongings. The deal? Kill Master Blaster, the man in charge of their methane production, as he's getting a bit too big for his boots. Master Blaster is actually two people, Master and Blaster. Master is a short person, and Blaster is a sort of mute manservant, but built like a brick shithouse. Max ends up fighting Blaster in a cage-like arena called Thunderdome. The rules? 2 men enter, 1 man leaves. Max gets the upper hand, but upon finding out that Blaster is actually mentally challenged, he refuses to kill him. He broke the deal he made with Auntie. Bust a deal, face the wheel. Max is punished, cast out into the Gulag, aka the Wasteland, with no water and no chance of survival. He's rescued by a group of kids holed up in a sort of oasis in the earth, a huge crack in the land. It turns out they're the children and descendants of the survivors of a plane crash, and were saved by the captain of the plane, Captain Walker. Max seems to bear striking resemblance to Walker, as shown in some primitive-like cave drawings, and after a little persuasion, agrees to help the kids. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome isn't like the previous 2 films in the franchise. It feels closer in tone to Fury Road. Whereas Mad Max and Mad Max 2 had a specific aesthetic, a grungy DIY shoot-on-the-fly style, Thunderdome feels like a big studio picture. The inclusion of Tina Turner makes that perfectly clear, and it's a somewhat more family-friendly affair. It doesn't have the brutality of either of the previous movies, and instead plays more into Max's more human side when it comes to the kids. Remember, he was a father. There's a sad story to the making of the film. George Miller was still mourning the death of his producing partner Byron Kennedy, who passed away after a helicopter accident. Miller didn't want to fully commit to the role as filmmaker, so asked his mentor, theatrical director George Ogilvy, to handle the acting scenes, and Miller would shoot the action, which explains why Thunderdome isn't as action-packed as Mad Max 2. However, the action sequences in Thunderdome are insanely well choreographed and shot by Miller. Interestingly, the film never started out as a Mad Max movie. It was originally intended as a post-apocalyptic Lord of the Flies type film about a tribe of children, but was changed and rewritten when Miller suggested that Max should be the one to find them. Miller also had to convince Mel Gibson to return, as Gibson had by then decided to hang up the Max role and wasn't interested in returning to the wasteland. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, while not reaching the chaotic vehicular mayhem of The Road Warrior, still manages to hit the right beats. Max is still a reluctant anti-hero, Australia is still a wasteland, and the villains are still villainous. Some viewers may be put off by the fact it doesn't have as much action, but Thunderdome has more story. This is both a positive and a negative for the film, as we want The Road Warrior, but we don't want it to be the same movie. Me personally, I love the movie. It was the first Mad Max movie I saw as a child, and the train chase at the end always blew my mind. Well, it did until I saw the tanker chase at the end of The Road Warrior. The film is available on almost every format: VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, 4K, even Laserdisc. However, as it seems to be the case in this video, the best option, obviously, has to be the 4K release. The Quiet Earth comes to us from New Zealand, directed by Jeff Murphy, a director who would go on to direct Young Guns 2, Free Jack, and Under Siege 2 Dark Territory, as well as acting as second unit director on Dante's Peak and all 3 original Lord of the Rings films, brings us The Quiet Earth. The Quiet Earth is his masterpiece. Quiet, slow burn apocalypse that for 50% of its runtime is a one-man show for lead Bruno Lawrence. Bruno Lawrence plays Zach Hobson, a scientist who wakes up in a motel room only to find he might just be the last man on Earth. At first, he takes great joy in this, moving into a mansion, having his pick of whatever he wants, and generally having a good time. That is until the loneliness and an existential crisis emerge. Zach questions why he's the only one to survive, whether or not everyone else is alive and he's the dead man, and this is his own personal hell. You know, the usual mental breakdown of the last man on Earth. After nearly committing suicide in a church, Zach comes to terms with his predicament and decides to try and work out why and how this happened. He moves out of his mansion and into a more modest home. At this point, he discovers he's not alone when a chance encounter with a woman makes him realize that whatever happened didn't just happen to him. The woman, Joanne, played by Alison Routledge, tells Zach about her time alone and what she went through. The two of them decide to make a go of it in this empty world, but all their plans of a happy family are shattered when they come across Appy, a Maori man and former criminal. A love triangle between the three of them begins, and much to Zack's dismay, it may be one-sided. Zack then thinks he has a way to make everything right, and rams a truck into the lab where he works. The final shot is Zack waking up on a beach, with Jupiter visible on the horizon. The Quiet Earth is a massively underrated gem of science fiction, as well as being the first ever science fiction film to be shot in New Zealand. There are moments of striking imagery, contemplation, realization, and then the obvious jealousy that comes within a love triangle. The Quiet Earth was based on the novel by Craig Harrison, who also wrote the screenplay with Bill Baer and star Bruno Lawrence. Lawrence was also a gifted screenwriter who had previously written and starred in the film Smash Palace, an early directorial effort from director Roger Donaldson, who would go on to become a Hollywood director in the late 80s and throughout the 90s. Murphy and Donaldson worked on Dante's Peak together, and Donaldson would also give us No Way Out with Kevin Costner, Cocktail with Tom Cruise, Species, The Recruit, and The Bank Job with Jason Statham. Sadly, both Bruno Lawrence and Jeff Murphy passed away, Lawrence in 1995 and Murphy in 2018. The Quiet Earth is available on DVD, Blu-ray, and on streaming platforms like Amazon and YouTube. So this brings us to the end of part 1 of the 1980s, looking at 1980 to 1985 in the world of post-apocalyptic cinema. There are a lot of films also that came out between 1980 and 1985, but these are the ones that I really wanted to focus on. There's some sort of lesser-known ones and some more kind of well-known ones there, specifically the Mad Max movies. But if I was to do a video about every single film, then it would take me a very, very long time to do. And as this is a brief history, I thought I'd select a few decent ones and go through those. So look forward to part 2, which will be looking at 1986 to 1989. Hopefully that won't take 2 weeks to do, because it's taken a very long time for me to edit this. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and sorry to keep you waiting, I guess. My name is Pedro. This is Pedro's Movie Cabin, and as usual, I'm going to throw up the peace sign, and I'm saluting you, and I'm out. Cheers, everyone.